and welcome to this review of my Razer Huntsman V2 keyboard. This is currently Razer's flagship keyboard. I've reviewed the TKL version of the Mark I Huntsman before, but this one is the full-size version, which is decked out a bit more as well. And that's nice because it gives me more to talk about than just the switches. However, most importantly, it has analog control, which is the single biggest improvement they could have made to the original Huntsman, and which I actually expressly asked for at the end of that video. So I had very high hopes when I got this in. The Huntsman is a major step forward for Razer, and honestly the best thing they could have done in terms of mechanical keyboards. I never liked their MX keyboards, as I really couldn't see a way to justify the prices they asked for considering what you got compared to a generic $30 off-brand mech from China. But the fact that they went for optoelectric switches, and most importantly did it well, means that suddenly it becomes a real and very attractive option for the high-end market segment. Considering they're a premium company, they have no interest in making low-end keyboards, of course, but I'd say that marketing an MX-based board in the high-end segment is now made virtually impossible from the competition that these $30 clone boards pose, as it's not really possible to match these with regards to price-quality ratio. But these optoelectric keyboards are an outstanding option for true enthusiasts who are looking for something that's not just a keyboard, but something top spec. And the price is there to match, as this keyboard retails for an eye-watering $270, almost as much as a brand new Ellipse Model F, which is also an enthusiast-level keyboard for exactly the same reasons. And yes, I hope I get mine in soon, please stop asking. My conclusion of the original Huntsman was that it was a very nice keyboard, sturdy keycaps, well kitted out, decent looking, I mean for a Razer product especially, and that the switches were excellent, super duper smooth, and with a very nice light weighting, which I think suits linear switches well. For those who are wondering where the smoothness comes from, this is because it's a contactless switch, so the physical rasping that's present in contact-based switches like Cherry MX and its clones is eliminated, decreasing the friction during the key travel. However, it was more or less completely killed by a fatal flaw in its design. The actuation point was stuck all the way up at 1mm, which, coupled with the feather-light weighting, made it fire accidentally with the merest touch of your fingers, which unfortunately rendered the board more or less completely useless during gaming. It was fine, for me at least, during typing, because I don't rest my fingers on the keys when typing, but during gaming it drove me absolutely bananas. So I ended my video with the recommendation for them to make it analog capable, and they did. And it worked, so if you want the really short version, it's good now. But there is actually a lot more to report about this keyboard, so if you want some more details, stick around. Let's go through the analog feature first, as it's by far the most important part of the keyboard in my opinion. The analog range spans from 1.5 to 3.6mm, which is not quite full range, but enough to work with in any case. Note that interestingly, even all the way at the top, it's not possible to make it as sensitive as the Mark I. But then if you wanted that, you could just buy a cheaper Mark I anyway, and subsequently regret buying an overly hyperactive keyboard instead of this one. By the way, they also changed the weighting of the switches. It used to be 30 to 60 grams, which is exactly the same as Cherry MX Red, but now it's stiffer. I had requested a force curve and some switches to show the more detailed differences, but Razer completely stopped responding at some point for no apparent reason, so unfortunately I can't. But anyway, I guess the stiffer weighting is reflected in the slider color as well, which is now black rather than red, although that might also be just to show that it's analog. The difference in weighting is quite noticeable. Like I said, they didn't actually give me the more interesting detail, so I can't say more than that. I actually like the lighter weighting on the Mark I more, but even these stiffer versions turned out to need a fairly deep actuation point for me, so maybe it's for the best like this. The switches work using a V-shaped shutter between an infrared LED and the photoresistor, which is moved out of the way when a key is pressed, so there's very few moving parts to this switch. The non-analog version just uses a flat shutter and has no capability of detecting multiple levels of illumination. I did a teardown video about how these switches work previously, so if you're interested, go and take a look. The Clicky version of the switch doesn't have analog capability, or at least not yet, but I suspect it wouldn't be all that useful as the tactile event would just pull the switch completely over the analog window anyway, so there isn't as much to be gained in the first place. Here you can see that it opens pretty much instantaneously as opposed to gradually. This is because of the click bolt mechanism that it employs. This mechanism is also explained in that teardown video, by the way. So obviously the analog feature is programmed using Razer's controlling software Synapse, of which they now use a new and apparently completely revamped version. Now, I've previously shat on Synapse for being unnecessary bloatware, but don't worry, it's just as shit as the previous versions. Even if you install the most bare-bones version possible, so without any of the optional extensions, it takes up 772 megabytes of storage, 270 megabytes of RAM, runs no less than 5 programs, and even if you quit it with exit all apps, it still keeps 4 of them silently running in the background. I'll leave it up to your imagination with these two, although I think we all have an idea. I mean, Jesus Christ, smoking a pancake, what paranormally cunt piss maggot thought that it was in any way allowable to leave 4 programs running silently in the background when you explicitly tell it to close everything down? That's just unacceptable. Unacceptable! But thankfully the board has onboard memory to store your settings, so basically you work out what analog settings you need, program some fancier backlighting if you want, like this fire effect, maybe some rebinds or macros, and then uninstall, that, uninstall, yes remove, super goodbye. The way you program the analog range is a bit strange because you can't actually drag select multiple keys in this program like you can in many others. Instead, you select one key, doesn't matter which one, and set the actuation depth on it and apply the setting to all keys. Now, interestingly, as you can see, you can also set the reset depth, which is a really cool extra feature. You can tweak your optimal key settings even further this way. These are the settings that I'm using. I found that in order to not accidentally actuate the switches, I needed to put the actuation depth as low as 3 millimeters. And I set the reset point at 2 millimeters to give me a bit of hysteresis, that way you avoid accidental double presses. But that's just me, of course. The whole point of analog control is that everyone can find their own optimal settings. I did find that the faux leather wrist rest, which is quite comfortable by the way, and which houses its own backlighting connecting through these things here, really helps with this keyboard. I think part of the reason I kept actuating the switches so easily was because of the height it starts at here, whereas with the wrist rests it starts with a more gentle slope, and this in turn makes me put less pressure on the switches when not typing. Normally I'm not really a rest kind of guy, but I think that due to the case shape and angle is kind of necessary here. Do note that this one at least isn't 100% level though. By the way, it also supports dual actuation, meaning that you can program 2 different inputs on the same key depending on how far you press it, such as ready grenade at the top and throw grenade at the bottom, which is a niche but potentially very useful addition. Some extra features that Elite Huntsman has over the Tournament Edition, or in plain English the full-size has over the TKL, apart from being a real keyboard compared to a little short ass of course, is this cluster over here. This comprises a set of media keys, which look nice and chunky, much better than the usual crappy ones you find on most keyboards, but they still use micro switches, which is a missed opportunity. I'd have gone for something way chunkier. Also, it's got a very small volume wheel with a mute button in the middle here, which is always useful even though the volume wheel comes across as somewhat flimsy. The RGB, if that's something you care about, is actually one of the weaker points of the keyboard, just like it was on the first Huntsman. The legends let the light through rather badly, which results in very splotchy letters. That's a common thing for backlit double shots, especially ones with such thin legends as these ones. And neither is it very intense, this is as bright as it gets. But really, if you buy a board like this for its RGB, you're kind of doing it wrong anyway. So yeah, the caps are double shot PBT. Basically that's the most durable material and the most durable printing method, so pretty high spec. That's something not all its competitors can boast about. The Apex Pro and Wooting, for example, just use laser ablated ABS. And these are the standard keycaps, by the way, they're not an optional extra. The build quality of the keyboard overall is very similar to that of the previous Huntsman, if not identical. It's a thin plastic case with an aluminium mounting plate, kind of standard nowadays for premium keyboards it seems. It's not bad, but not exactly a Model F either. It weighs just under 1.2 kilos, or in imperial units, 12 gallons of deep-fried freedom. Note that this can't be taken apart very easily, so servicing it is going to be quite a palaver. Also, please note that the keyboard makes an audible buzzing sound, which is the backlighting. It's difficult to capture on a microphone, but trust me, it's there. The keyboard comes with a USB pass-through as well, but instead of bundling both cables into one giant piece of rebar, they've split them up into two. Now, this has the advantage of making the individual cables more pliable, and thus less likely to be in the way, but they still are. I think they could really do with making these less stiff. Still, they're braided and very tough. An interesting point is that the actual connector cable that's supposed to go into the PC isn't a USB-A connector, but a USB-C one. It comes with an adapter to USB-A, but I'm really wondering why they did this, although I guess an advantage of this is that you can use it with your phone or tablet, if it supports it, which I don't think that many phones would. Furthermore, the keyboard is also rated for USB 3.0. Now, I can answer what happens if you don't use this, as I accidentally used a 1.0 hub on a 3.0 port to connect it at first. Basically, the computer works for 2 seconds, then 2 seconds of roughly 1 frame per second, and then 2 seconds of working again, and 2 seconds of hanging, etc. ad infinitum. It did this very specifically when I used my microphone, such as on Discord or when recording audio for these reviews. Took me a while to figure out what was going on with this crazy chugging issue, but since I plugged it directly into a 3.0 port, it hasn't given me any issues. But I'd say that if you don't have a 3.0 port, you shouldn't get this because it really doesn't work properly without it. So let's cut to the coin. As I mentioned previously, this one costs $270, or in freedom units, $270. Currently, the V1 Elite, which is roughly the same keyboard except with ABS keycaps and no analog capability, costs $210, so $60 less. Now, I'd say that if this V2 is within your budget, it's easily worth the extra $60, to the point where I think you'd be making a huge mistake in buying the V1 unless you somehow manage to avoid setting off its hyperactive switches, which I can imagine would be possible only with the spindliest of fingers. This V2 is, in my opinion, really what the board should have been in the first place. It's very expensive, even compared to its competitors. The SteelSeries Apex Pro is $230, and the Wooting 2 is $160, so $100 less, and both of those are full-size and analog capable too, although there is some difference in switch performance between the three, which I've addressed before, and some differences in extra features, software, etc. Overall, it's an excellent product. If you like linear switches and don't just want a $30 MX mech from China, this is one of the options you should be looking at, even if it is in quite a different budget category. It's not without its flaws, but they're getting fewer with each board Razer releases, to be honest. They've really started to grow on me. I mean, Synapse still sucks, the build quality could be improved a bit, and it's very expensive, but other than that, I'm kind of struggling to come up with any serious negatives here, and frankly, I never saw high cost for a product that was worth it as a genuine negative anyway. I'd rather pay a bit more and get something I really want that doesn't immediately die on me. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.